one by one. First, multilingualism is the ability of an individual speaker or a community of speakers to communicate effectively in three or more languages. Another example, Far is fluent in English, mother speak Indonesian and can speak English, and they live in Jakarta. And the second in bilingualism, the ability of individual or the members of a community to use two languages effectively. An example of bilingualism is bilingual education, when a student talks in both English and the language of their native country. Monolingualism, also said of a text dictionary or conversation written or conducted in only one language, and of an entity in which a single language is either used to officially recognize particular when being compared with bilingual or multilingual entities or the phrases of different individuals speaking different language. Example of my great rigors in being monolingual and not linguist another language when I was younger. They I will explain the meaning of the first language and second language. First language. First language, native tongue, native language, or mother or father or parents' tongue. Also known as arterial language or first language is a language that a person has been exposed to from birth or within the critical period. Second language. In a abbreviation for a second language or a language that is not the mother tongue, sometimes it is used to refer to speakers who are speaking a second language. Key differences between first language and second language. First language, on the other hand, is a language acquired by babies natural from the parents. They can have double first language as a result of parents emerging from varying linguistic background. Second language is a language learned at a later stage after a mother tongue. Thank you.
The first language and second language speakers of different languages can only be estimated. Reason for uncertainty is reporting language data includes some which have social and political significance and some which merely reflects imprecise or ambiguous terminology. For example, the first, linguistic information is often not officially collected. Linguistic information may not be reliable. Second, answer to question seeking. The third, there is an agreement on definition of terms and on criteria for identification. Linguistic information, often not officially collected. Census forms in many countries do not include questions on language background. Presumably, it is impractical to gather. In cases where responses conquering language would essentially identify minority groups member. Answers to questions seeking linguistic information may not be reliable. Answers to questions seeking linguistic information may not want to be identified as speakers of a minority language. Their linguistic mispresentations was likely motivated by fear that lack of English would trigger further questions about their as citizenship, a reasonable concern on their part, although not the school's intent. There is lack of agreement on definition of terms and on criteria for identification. In this case, both are first language and either or both might be considered a native language. Perhaps the most basic definitional basis for unreliability in statistics lies in the meaning of language itself, for what counts as a separate language involves in social, political, as well as linguistic criteria.
Okay, thanks for the time given to me. My name is Aistipani Kapitan, and now I will present the material about the nature of language learning. And in this material, there are 2 points that I will explain. First, sound vowels and consonant sounds. Before we studied in school, we already knew about these two sounds, which we did unconsciously. I mean, by 6 months of age, a baby has all the vowels and most of the consonant sounds out of language. If children hear English, it is certain that the sounds they make is definitely English and ignores others' language. And well, as Spanish, if the child learns Spanish, of what they know first is Spanish, then they will ignore English as between the flavors are in pero or but, and the trailer double R in pero or dog, and to disregard some differences that are not distinctive is in Spanish, but vital to English word, meaning as the s and st of chairs and chairs exist in the word. Okay, and the second is how can children master their language or first language? On average, children have mastered most of the distinctive sounds of their first language before they are 3 years old, and an awareness of basic discourse patterns such as vocal conversation arises even at an earlier age. Children control most of the basic first language grammar patterns before they are 5 or 6 years old. Also, complex grammar patterns continue to develop during the school years. If young children hear and respond to 2 or more languages in their environment, the result is simultaneous or multilingualism as described in the first chapter. It has been suggested the mastery of the first language is largely the result of children's natural desire to please their loving parents who wait impatiently for them to speak regarding stable words. There are also those who argue that children's language acquisition is purposeful, that they develop a desire to communicate their wants and needs to the people who care for them. However, this has not been shown to be an adequate explanation, since within the limited scope of children's activities, communicative needs appear to be met mostly by gesture and non-speech sounds such as screams, whines, grunts, and cries. Perhaps the most widely held view of the mid-20th century was that children learn language by imitating, or stimulus-response theory. While it is true that much of children's early language learning can be attributed to their imitation of the sounds and words around them, many of their utterances are quite original and completely inexplicable, and imitation as they have never heard of them before. Okay, thanks for my explanation. Next to my friends.
Okay, next, the role of social experience. Language-specific learning plays a crucial role. Not all the first language acquisition can be attributed to innate ability, but the language-specific learning also has an important role. Even if the universe program in children, but they must learn the features so that they can differentiate their first language to all other possible human language, and the children will never acquire such as language specific learning knowledge unless they use the language around them. And the source of first language input and variation and interaction vary depending on cultural and social factors. Basically, the main source of first language input come up from their mother, and then, but in the other hand, father or other siblings or even a servant have major children responsibility in many society, and also maybe the dominant source of input. And there is a considerable variance in vocabulary knowledge depending on social context, because vocabulary is typically learned in conjunction with social experience. Besides that, there is also variation to some extent in what function of speaking and in what function speaking learn to use at an early age depending on social experience. Next, the first language and second language learning. There are three phases comparison of first language and second language learning. They are the initial state, the intermediate state, and the final state. And the initial stage, in this stage, many linguists and psychologists believe includes the underlying knowledge about language structure and principles that in learners had at very start of first language and second language acquisition. And then the intermediate stage covers all stages which take of basic language development. And the final stage is the outcome of first language and second language learning.
Okay, now I will explain about initial state. So, the term initial state is variously used to mean the kind of unconscious linguistic knowledge that the learner starts out with advance of the second language input and to refer the characteristic of the earliest grammar. Initial state in children's mind for first language almost surely is an innate capacity to learn language. Some linguists and psychologists believe that the genetic predisposition which children have from birth. Others believe that some aspects of the innate capacity which children have for first language remain in force for acquisition of subsequent language, but that some aspects of this natural ability are lost with advancing age. Still, others believe that no innate capacity for language acquisition remains beyond childhood, and that subsequent languages are learned by means which are more keen, such as mathematics or history. A major component state for second language must be prior knowledge of first language. The entails knowledge of how language in general as well as merit of language specific features which are only partially relevant for production of the new second language.
Okay, the next is the intermediate state, and I will explain about it. But before I start, let me introduce myself. My name is MC Mariatuno. The intermediate state, in that we will be discussing about basic development of our language, what we need to improve our language, and what kind of facilitators we need to improve our language. So this is the difference between first language and second language. In the intermediate state, they have children grammar and a language the embassy process in the children's grammar through the maturation process and learning language by transfer process. Thank you.
Okay, now I will talk about final state. A final state is a state in a compound state that designates that the compound state in question has completed, will not process any further event. The final state, the outcome of first language or second language learning. The final state by second language development by definition is native linguistic competence, while vocabulary learning and cultivation of specialist registers, such as formal academic written style, may continue into adulthood, the basic phonological and grammatical system, or whatever language. Children here around them are essentially established by the age of about 5 or 6 years, as we have already noted, along with vocabulary knowledge and interaction skills that are adequate for fulfilling communicative functions. On the other hand, the final state of second linguistic development, again by commonly held definition, can never be totally native linguistic competence, and the level of proficiency which learner helix is highly variable. Some learners reach at least near native or native-like competence in second linguistic, along with native competence in second linguistic, but many cases in some point to make further progress toward the learning target in response to second linguistic input, resulting in a final state, which still include instances of second linguistic interference or creative structures different from any that would be produced by a native speaker of the second linguistic.
Okay, my name is Febriani Octavianus. In this session, I want to explain about children's knowledge of language goes beyond what could be learned from the input they receive. Okay, in my opinion, the argument about children's knowledge of language goes beyond what could be learned from the input they receive. I conclude that children easily grasp every language heard from the people around them, and therefore, when we see a child whose age is not sufficient and accept every language heard, and it is not surprising that he asks, because it is for the needs of his knowledge as a child. And many languages may sound complicated for him to understand at an age who has not been good and at understanding every meaning of the language heard. For example, I have a younger brother who is 6 years old, and sometimes he hears words that he has never heard before, but he accepted that word and asks the meaning of the word. This is what I mean by the children readily accept the language he hears. Thank you.
Constraints and principles cannot be learned. Constraints and principles cannot be learned is because, first, children are very young when acquiring first language. The second, they do not have the cognitive ability to understand the principles of grammar as a system. Third, because the innate capacity, they are capable of producing correct grammar. Universal patterns of development cannot be explained by language-specific input. The way children develop their own linguistic competence is not directly determined by the input they receive. The logical problem of language learning. For a long time, people thought that children learn language by imitating those around them. More recent point of view claim that children have an innate language ability There are three major arguments supporting this notion. First of all, children often say things that adults do not. This is especially true of children's tendency to use regular patterns to form plurals or past tense on words that will have irregular formation. Children frequently say things like good, mans, mouses, and sheeps, even though it is highly unlikely that any adult around them ever produce such forms in front of them. We also know that children do not learn language simply by imitation, because they do not imitate adult language well when asked to do so.
Okay, I will explain about frameworks for second language acquisition. Study of second language acquisition can be categorized as primarily based on linguistic, psychological, and social frameworks. We should keep in mind that there are extensive interrelationships among them. The first categorized is linguistic. There have been foci or plural of focus for the study of second language acquisition from linguistic perspective since 1960. The perspectives of linguistics are internal and external. The first perspective of linguistics is internal focus. According to Chomsky in 1957 and 1965, internal focus is the transformational generative grammar. Internal focus for the study of second language acquisition that is primarily based on the work of Noam Chomsky and his followers. It sets goal of study as accounting for speakers' internalized, underlying knowledge of language rather than the description of surface forms as in earlier structuralism. The second one is external focus. It is the important linguistic frameworks contributing to an external focus on second language acquisition that are categorized within functionalism. External focus for the study of second language acquisition that emphasizes language use, including the function of language that are realized in learners' production at different stages of development.
Okay, I will explain you about psychological. Based on psychological perspective, second language acquisition has been three focus. There are languages and the brain, learning process, and learner difference. The first one is language and the brain. The location and representation of language in the brain has been of interest to biologists and psychologists since the 19th century, and the expanding field of neurolinguistics was one of the first to influence cognitive perspective on second language acquisition when semantic study began in 1960th century. Landmark 1967 generated great interest when he argued that three is a critical period of language acquisition which has a neurological basis, and much age related research on second language acquisition is essentially grounded in this framework. The second one is learning process. The focus on learning process has been heavily influenced by computer-based information processing models of learning, which were established in cognitive psychology by the 1960th century. The last one is learner difference. The focus on the learner difference in second language acquisition has been most concurrent with the question why some learners are more successful than others.
My name is Filipus Tomoes. The last point is social. So there are two perspectives of studying second language acquisition. The first one is microsocial. So focus related to microsocial language acquisition and use in immediate social contexts of production, interpretation, interaction, and variety theory and accommodation. Theory include exploration of systematic difference in learner production, which depend of context of use, and the theory consider why the target of second language acquisition may be different even within groups who are intensively learning in the same language. The second one is microsocial. The concept of microsocial focus related language acquisition and use to broader ecological contexts, including culture, political, and educational settings. The ethnography of communication framework extends the notion of what being acquisition in SLA beyond linguistic and culture to include and cultured knowledge that's requiring. So, in English acquisition, we need a social to interact someone to others, so it can create a good relationship. That's all of our presentation from Group 1. Thanks for your participation and your attentions. Thank you. Bye for now.